Good morning, everybody. We will call the February 27th, 2023 work session to order. I just want to remind everybody that during work sessions, the public does not get to speak. I know there's a lot of interest in one of the items today, so Thursday will be that opportunity. I am going to make some announcements later about that. We are not allowing signs in the chambers, so if you're coming Thursday, you can have them outside, but not in the chambers. And we are going to have that be an orderly meeting, or I am going to shut people down. So I just want to make that clear up front. We're going to start out on a lighter note. I'd like to call forward Jose De Leon, Lane Lightfoot, Timothy Lovely, Jordan Bailey, and Casey Ray to be sworn in this morning. Chief?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Dan Slaughter, Chief of Police. It's my honor to introduce to you 5 new candidates and employees of the Police Department. First, starting to my left and working to the right is Jordan Bailey. He begins his employment with Clearwater Police Department on January 30th. He graduated from North Carolina State University with a bachelor's degree, and he served as a special agent with the FBI and was a detective with the Greensboro Police Department. Jose De Leon begins his employment as well on the 30th. He graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School and attended Lehman College, and he served in the United States Air Force from 2012 to 2018, and then was a police officer for the New York City Police Department from 2017 to 2022. Lane Lightfoot begins his employment as well. He graduated from St. Petersburg High School and served as a police officer for the Largo Police Department from 2020 to 2022. And Timothy Lovely begins his employment as well. He graduated from Plant High School and worked as a part owner of a family restaurant in Tennessee prior to relocating to Clearwater. And Casey Ray, who attended Calvary Christian High School and graduated from St. Petersburg College Law Enforcement Academy in December of 22, and he worked for our police department as a police aide from 2021 up until transitioning to the police officer. So with your direction, Mayor, I'd ask you to have the clerk to swear him in.
Please do, Madam Clerk. If there's any, hold on, Rosemary, if there's any family members that would like to take a photo, you're welcome to come back behind us. It's a better angle. Just leave your signs.
Yeah. You can come on over this way.
Yeah, you can come up.
Yeah.
One second.
Raise your right hand. I state your name.
I
Do
solemnly swear
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution and government
the Constitution and government
of the United States,
of the United
the
States
state of Florida,
and the state of Florida
and the charter and laws
and the charter and
of
laws
the city of Clearwater,
of the city of Clearwater,
that I am duly qualified
that I am duly qualified
to hold office
to hold office
under the charter and laws
under the charter and laws
of the city of Clearwater,
of the city of Clearwater,
and that I will,
and that I will
well and faithfully,
perform the duties
of a police officer,
of a police officer,
in which I am now about to enter.
of which I am now about to enter.
Congratulations. Thank
Be
you.
safe.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We look forward to you all having a long and safe career. All right, item 3.1.
Cultural assessment presentation by Kaleidoscope Group.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager Porter. As you know, we are concluding our cultural assessment that we started about over a year ago. We have with us our vendors that were able to provide that assessment for us. The Kaleidoscope Group here with me today is Mr. Chris George and Dr. Jesse Lee. And they're going to kind of go over some of the findings from our initial assessment and just provide more insight into what they were able to gather as they conducted this assessment.
Good morning, Council. Thank you for having us back again. Okay, so we are, just want to really say thank you. This has been an incredible process, and there has been incredible participation and support of this work throughout the last year by all of your leaders and departments. So we look forward to sharing that with you.
You can go get coffee now.
Wondering if Dad can give me his second one.
No.
You didn't hear it.
Miss 213?
Doesn't start listening until after that second cup.
You want to take my iPad and put it on the Elmo?
They could go out to the agenda and just link to it.
I'm gonna save it on.
Can't they just get it through the
Yeah.
website?
So as you know, we were here in January and we shared a little bit of a progress update. And at that time, we shared really what your North Star was, why you were doing this, which is just as important as what you're doing. And so this was your why. You really wanted to look at how you challenged and thought and operated and really take that to the next level, better reflecting the communities you serve, providing exceptional service in all that you do, improving your work products and ideas, and reinvigorating a positive and supportive culture, building on some of the culture work that's already been taken place, be a workplace destination for all people here, and leverage DEI as a competitive advantage, and really use it as part of telling the Clearwater compelling story. So that's your why, and then your what really goes into the next slide, which is your vision. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay, how about that? There we go. So your vision of success, we shared this already. This is your North Star, and everything you do is really lining up towards that North Star. City of Clearwater being committed to providing opportunities for all walks of life to empower employees to play their goals and creating a thriving community of shared voices and diverse thought. So with that, now we said, all right, now that you know where you want to go, and that vision being developed by a lot of different voices in the city that work here, what's going to be the objectives and baseline to achieve that? And so we really looked at about 4 areas. One, I made sure that we provided a safe space where everybody felt respected and really could have that sense of belonging, promoting an organizational culture where everybody embraces DEI and belonging, championing inclusive practices in all that you do in all parts of the city, and then really making sure that as you make decisions, you're using DEI as a lens to really drive mission. So those were the objectives. And with that, we looked at a lot of different elements of the internal processes within your culture and in your workforce. So we had 32 interviews with all of your leaders. We conducted a DEI survey, which had an exceptional response rate of 70%, which is at the higher echelon of responses. We conducted 22 focus groups with over 100 participants. So we got a lot of voices that kind of gave color to what was learned in the survey. As well as we looking at talent management reviews, a lot of documents that we looked at around your policies, processes, practices. And then finally, we looked at your demographics. What is the composition of your workforce, and where did you have opportunity to be even better? So with all of that work, we said, all right, let's look at the foundation that you had. You had conducted a culture survey the previous year. We built on some of those findings where some opportunity, really looking at the morale and building the morale. So these were some of the survey responses, I believe, that were garnered from that survey. And then from there, we looked at 7 drivers of inclusion. Those drivers are listed up here, and you can see your highest scoring area around diverse representation, accountability, individual connection, people really feeling like they belong, and then some opportunities with equity and having a voice. So we'll share a little bit more about that. So with everything, we always start with the positive. You actually have a really strong foundation. People like working here. People really believe that they're making a difference. They're proud to be here. They like their jobs. They like the camaraderie. So you'll see a lot of that here. A lot of people actually give the city credit for a lot of the work that has already been done around DEI. You've had an infrastructure around that since 2008, and people actually see it in the people practices, so they appreciate that. They also believe that you as a council and city managers and leaders really do support it, maybe not sure how to do it, but that people believe in it. And then finally, they see it through a lot of the sponsored efforts that happen, where you actually are investing in activities and events for people of all backgrounds to be successful. So then with that strong foundation, we found some opportunities, and they kind of were in 4 buckets. Looking at representation, so while there is representation, there's some opportunities for it, based on looking at the community cohort availability. We also saw that while you have a DEI department, they were really overtaxed and maybe focusing on some of the wrong things. So if we put them in the right situation, they could even advance DEI in a greater way. And then culture, looking at how we can build on the morale so that people of all backgrounds can really work well together and be high performing. And then lastly, trust. How can we make sure that as people start to see that they can achieve their potential here, work well together, that then will also build trust. So with those opportunities, we found as it related to representation that you have an even better opportunity to advance women and bring women into the organization. You don't really hit the cohort in the community, so we've given some specific recommendations around that. And then looking at the Office of DEI and revamping them and restructuring and strategizing for them will actually help garner greater results. And then as it relates to your systems, saw some opportunities to shore up and align your performance review and feedback process, which that work has already started and was already going to be underway. So that's great news for you. You're already moving the needle there. And then the last two really around looking at making sure that people understand how equity and inclusion are really a part of the day-to-day process and work, and how people can start to think about it proactively instead of reactively. And then lastly, making sure that senior leaders and management are aligned with the things that are important in the workplace as it relates to supervisors and individual contributors. So in other words, everybody's working towards the same things with the same priorities and goals. So these were your key areas of opportunity. And as we looked at the recommendations, we came up with about 8 buckets for recommendations for you to get even better. So we have some very specific ones related to representation about how you can promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways you haven't been before, attracting more diverse talent, specifically women, Asian, and female candidates in different spaces and places where you have opportunity, and then looking at the additional hiring measures to put in place beyond what you already had, and building your senior management and leadership representation as time goes by in a very strategic way. Organizational culture, you have some opportunities to recognize the culture issues and get very specific about them, put them into your values. Also looking at accountabilities for culture. Right now they don't really exist, but how do we equip people so that people can really build a culture that's going to be helpful for the city. And then also having and really looking at finding a way for all employees to have a voice in the things that matter, and coming up with a strategic way to do that. And then finally, in that organizational culture, putting some additional supports for inclusion and belonging that aren't there now. It'll really take you a long way. And then the 3 other areas are around this slide, specifically around leadership, performance feedback, and people data. And leadership is really just going to be about equipping them to play their role even more effectively. They're already out there doing the functional things, but how do they lead inclusive teams, and how do they make sure that they're leading and motivating across lines of difference? So we've got some great recommendations there to increase accountability and their competence. Performance feedback, again, that's underway. Share that. That's just aligning it, making it consistent and fair for everybody. And then lastly, you guys already have a pretty robust system around how you look at people data, and we've given some recommendations that have already been put in place so that you can continually measure in the way that you want to around the workforce that you have today and the one you want to build for tomorrow. And then these last recommendations really are targeted for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the city. It's really about building that office that we talked about, restructuring and refocusing them. That is underway. And then putting some supports in place for education opportunities, strategies, events, things that are going to be important to build the city's diversity and the commitment. And then finally, making sure that there's a committee in place that represents all of your departments and your stakeholders so that you really have a real-time pulse and you can continue to be guiding and building that strategy. So with all of that said, we're working on those recommendations. Our next steps are really going to be to create 2 things. Create a strategy for the city overall and for different departments. So we will be sharing these overall findings with leaders today, this afternoon actually. And then we will also be meeting with them in one-on-one settings during the month of March to share their very specific department level findings and have them create a very tailored action plan for them to be able to build and integrate DEI into what they do every day and into their leadership. And as well as have a communication plan and then relaunching the Diversity Leadership Committee to help these very busy people over here. So that's the report in a nutshell. This was a lot of information we tried to distill down, but would love to open it up for any questions.
Questions? Vice Mayor?
Thank you for that presentation. It was great information. On your last slide, we've got the next step. So you've got all the kind of some data and some overall findings. And I think the most important thing then is the strategic steps. What are we going to do to improve and grow and be the best that we can be? So we've got this next steps, but there isn't a timeline on here. Can you flesh out some of the timeline?
Yeah, that's a great question. We will actually be finalizing that strategy during the month of March, working with ODES and Human Resources and then the department leaders themselves. So then Jesse and I will probably be back here for one more event to kind of share where the city should be going with that, what that looks like, and just as importantly, how to make sure you integrate it into your strategic plan.
That was another question, exactly. Do you see a place for DEI in our strategic plan?
It's all over it, yeah.
And then are you thinking then like early summer that you'd have an update on the strategies, like June, July, or do you not have
I
a
think
month in mind?
sooner than that. We will probably, I would say more like April, May.
Oh, good.
We'll be back here.
Okay. And that'll be a written report that's attached with all the
Yeah, you
articulation?
will, yep,
Okay.
you will have, it'll be pretty comprehensive, yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. 3.2.
Approve an agreement for executive search firm services between the city and GovHR USA for the city manager recruiting services.
Good morning, Council. Billy Kirkpatrick, Human Resources. I have our vendor on the line, so if we have questions at the end. In January, we issued an informal request for responses for executive recruiting services for the city manager. 2 qualified responses were received and evaluated by HR staff. GovHR USA was selected. GovHR is a public management consulting firm, a certified female business enterprise, working exclusively in the public and nonprofit sectors. The firm has performed more than 1,000 recruitments, over 250 for executive manager level, including the city manager for Lakeland, the assistant city managers for Gainesville and Palm Beach, and the assistant and deputy county administrators for Pinellas County. Our agreement includes development of a position profile, advertising and candidate outreach, applicant screening and assessment, recommendation of semifinalists, comprehensive background and reference checks, on-site interviews, and negotiation assistance. If our selection leaves within 12 months of appointment, GovHR will conduct 1 additional recruitment at the cost of expenses and advertising only. So I do have our recruiter on the line if you have any questions.
Questions?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to have a discussion. But not
Okay.
for recruiters, so I don't know if you want to,
Councilmember Allbritton? I'll come back to the discussion.
okay.
Yeah, I just want to I just want to have a discussion, not really questions at this point.
Okay. I was a little concerned about the size of the cities. Lakeland is similar in size. But some of the others, are really small. Plymouth, 8,900 residents. And I know this group was recommended. I did reach out, and I think you were all copied. I did reach out to the mayor of Lakeland and ask how he felt about his experience with the group. But that's not who we have on this assignment, correct?
We have, our recruiter is Lee Shimborski.
Right. So Heidi Voorhees was the Lakeland representative, I guess.
So we had, like I said, we had 2 responses. Out of the 2, this was the preferred. They had far more recent recruitments in Florida, and they do have some more sizable ones, like the county.
I mean, I don't have a problem with the money or the time frame, so. You have any questions?
No, I mean, I made a note of the size of the municipalities as well. They do have a number of counties, and they do
Yes.
have a number from the Midwest that you and I might be familiar with. But that was a concern, but they, yeah, not really a larger municipality, but county government. And they have worked with Pinellas County government.
No, they came highly recommended by Mr. Burton. I spoke to him directly about it, so. So you can cut them loose, I guess, on the
Okay.
phone. Councilmember Teixeira.
So had this agenda item been on like the first week of January, I think I would proceed with no comment. However, the last 6 to 8 weeks has given me an opportunity to rethink. And in the last few weeks, Ms. Poirier, through no fault of her own, has inherited many challenges. And in the last few weeks, she's had to deal with a relentless onslaught of critical and complicated challenges. And she's faced them with professionalism, transparency, and poise. Her previous role in the HR department is very evident in the way you negotiate and your ability to interact with all the different departments. And so having said that, I think she's proven to be a very capable, strong woman. And after that DEI presentation, I think it's would be a great step to promote a strong, capable woman in this position. But I also want to mention that the last 2 searches were, I think, unsuccessful. And that was in the best of times. Our environment has changed, and I am not confident that we can find a good candidate with this environment, with all the challenges that we have, over 200 empty staff positions. And so I don't want to fall in that trap as always the grass greener on the other side. And I think time is of the essence as well. Having an interim city manager and waiting for the process to get a new one that may or may not be better will put us in a position that will limit our ability to deal with these very challenging issues that we're facing. So I am very confident in the way I feel about having Ms. Poirier just receive this position. That's how I feel after the last few weeks. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not going to repeat everything that Councilmember Teixeira said, but I agree wholeheartedly. You know, I think our Jennifer Poyer has, she's gone through the trial by fire. And, you know, we want somebody that understands our city and understands Clearwater. She's been here a while and knows that. And she's handled these issues that have come up, I thought, professionally with tact, and she's very responsive, at least to me, on everything that I've brought forward to her since she's been interim city manager. So I was going to suggest today that Thursday night we consider just making her our new city manager. I think she's a good fit for Clearwater. We don't have to go through the are they a good fit thing again. And, you know, the city's in flux right now. We have 1,800 or so employees, and they're looking for somebody to guide the ship. And the sooner that we can make that happen, the better for Clearwater. And as far as I'm concerned, Jennifer's done a great job so far. I know she'll do a great job in the future. So my vote Thursday would just be to get on with it and make her the city manager.
Well, I think Ms. Poyer's done a wonderful job. I don't I don't question that at all, and as you said, she's been thrown into very difficult circumstances and done a marvelous job. I need to think about it between now and Thursday. And that is not a knock against you. I want to make that perfectly clear. I do think a process is a good thing, and I'm just going to relate something to a situation that I went through as chairman of Ruth Eckert Hall. We had, our executive director leave in Zeb Buffman, and we had Susan Crockett, who had been with the Hall for 31 years, done pretty much every job, knew the business from soup to nuts. And we still went through a search because at the end of the day, she won the job. She was the best candidate there was. But we at least did the due diligence and went through a process. And so I need to think about that. You are newer to the position, obviously. And, I love having somebody that I know, their work ethic, the way they make decisions, the fact that they know all the players in the city and know, all the different issues that are involved. I think that is tremendously beneficial. There is a real home field advantage to that. And I do think it could be difficult because of only having Mr. Jennings for 13 months and some of the other issues we're facing right now. But I also wonder if it's still not the best process to go through a search, and if at the end of the day, Ms. Poyer is still clearly the best candidate, then certainly I won't have any reluctance whatsoever to make that decision. And there is a certain amount of not unrest, but lack of certainty when you don't have a permanent city manager in hiring some of the directors and other things. That is a challenge. I don't think we're going to be able to fill those director spots as easily when they don't know who their permanent boss is going to be. So certainly there are some advantages to going ahead and making Ms. Poyer the permanent city manager. And I have no doubt that in time, you're going to have all the goods that you need to run any city. That's kind of how I feel right now. We can't vote on it tonight. It does require 4 council members to vote in the affirmative from our charter. So I just want to make certain everybody's aware of that fact. Vice Mayor?
Well, I appreciate your comments, and everyone who's spoken. I agree with both. I tend to agree lean more towards the mayor. I think it's good practice to conduct a search and good governance. I, too, have been incredibly impressed by Jennifer's performance in her role of interim city manager. She has shown great leadership in addressing key issues. She has shown incredible transparency and urgency. And the last 6 to 8 weeks, it's also reminded me that these qualities are very difficult to determine in interviewing candidates, and therefore how important and valuable it is to have firsthand experience with candidates and their performance. And so I am hopeful that Jennifer will apply for the position, given her performance so far. I have been incredibly impressed. But again, I think it's part of due diligence and good governance to go through that process. But I too am not committed to that, and so we've got until Thursday to continue to think it over, and if residents want to reach out with any expertise or comments, that's always welcome.
Councilmember Bunker.
I too have been incredibly impressed with Jennifer. After the first meeting, I told her, best meeting I've ever had. I know she's up to the task. I do agree, however, that a search is a good idea. the struggles we've had in the last two searches show it's not going to be easy. And the scandals that we've had recently and the departure of John Jennings going to make it even more difficult. But I think it's worth going through the process to see if there's somebody out there that we should consider. But, I mean, we'd be very lucky to have Jennifer full-time.
You want to weigh in?
Absolutely not. Whatever the will of the council, I'm happy. I appreciate all the comments. It has certainly been an incredible experience these last few weeks, and we'll continue to do what we have been doing, which is being responsive to the staff, to the council, and to the residents. And so we will keep on regardless of what the council decides.
Councilmember Allbritton.
So, just a thought. So we're discussing this. I appreciate everybody's point of view. My concern is this, with everybody very happy with what Jennifer has done, and then we proceed forward on a search, I mean, they're going to look back, anybody that's interested, and see that, they might not have a good chance, since we're all leaning and very appreciative of what Jennifer's done so far. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. Also, I have concern about Jennifer. What will her position be, and so just keep that in mind as well. So I think time is of the issue right now. I think that the sooner we can get back on track with a city manager, the better for everybody in the city. So we'll discuss this again on Thursday evening.
All right. Thank you. 4.1.
Approve an event license agreement between Jones Lang LaSalle and the City of Clearwater.
Good morning, Dan Slaughter, Police Chief. This agreement with Jones Lang LaSalle America is for, they're the management company for Countryside Mall at 27001 US 19 North. This is to facilitate the Clearwater Police Department, the solid waste program for a shred event that will occur on April 22nd between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. This agreement's been reviewed by Legal and Risk and PD, and they're all recommending approval. This agreement has to come before council because of the hold harmless and indemnity agreement, which is what's in front of you.
Any questions for the chief? Great event. Thank you, Chief, for organizing it. Consent?
Yes.
4.2.
Amend the Clearwater Code of Ordinances establishing a vehicle safety zone for Bread and Roses Women's Health Center.
Good morning. The department is regularly called to respond and mediate disputes associated with protest activities and the ability for other citizens to ingress and egress the Bread and Roses Women's Health Center at 1560 South Highland Avenue. The protest activities have become a little more escalating in the past several months and is creating an unsafe situation when the vehicles enter and leave the location. The police department has personally observed protesters repeatedly crossing the driveway and disrupting the ingress and egress of the vehicles and creating an unsafe condition. I have a video available I'd like to show you. You can get to see firsthand
That's right. You can't tell God you weren't born. Ha! You were born today. That's right. You lie to yourself. Wicked, disgusting sinner. That's why you're going to perish.
God can do whatever he wants. Right there.
All the time. You're going to die and go straight to hell.
Exactly what it means. You know what? God can do whatever he wants.
God might kill you today.
He might kill you too, you asshole.
I'm ready, man. Good. I'm ready. God goes according to his word.
That's the day of one's birth as long as you're born again.
I'm ready to die. You're not ready to die. You die today in your sin. You're going to bust hell wide open. You're going to split hell wide open. You're going to go down into the pit, and you're going to sin. You're going to wish dead. You turn from your wicked way. That's right, I hate sin. That's right, I hate sin. I hate wickedness. Just like God does. Just like God does. God hates sin. God hates all workers of iniquity. God hates those that shed innocent blood. God hates your pride. God hates you, sinner. That's why you're going to pay. Sir, hang around a little while.
I am.
I'm here until you guys leave. You'll see me rip that rope back down again. Okay. All right. Hang around. I will.
Let's make sure that we fully listen to all of the audio that she says in her videos. She says that he said something with regard to everything. We want to make sure that it's fully documented in your report. Okay.
You stole the cookie from the cookie jar and shook your head no. You're a liar. A liar. Lying's wrong. You do nothing but the wrong thing. When are you going to turn around and do it right? Do the right thing.
We could hear that nasty music all the way
I called my wife and my family an asshole when they were driving by. We weren't even here for your shit. We were here for the fucking asshole. Bullshit, man. We were driving by. And you're sitting here stuck.
Is there anything else productive about this? Because I think we've got the flavor of it, Chief.
Okay.
I got better things to do.
It is on the agenda item 2, if anybody wants to see the remainder as well. So there's also been repeatedly reports about protesters knocking on car windows and putting material in through open windows. And at the time when they're ingressing and egressing the properties, there's an inability to utilize the trespass statute because it is a public right-of-way area. So that is not a tool that's available to us. So to protect the right of the people to protest and for the vehicles to safely enter and exit the facility, the PD is seeking to amend Ordinance 2810 and to establish a 5-foot vehicle buffer zone on the north and south side of the driveway. So that zone would be in place Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. at 1516 South Highland Avenue only. And case law supports this action when there is a substantial government interest, which we believe there is. People who violate the ordinance would be subject to a Class 3 violation, which is $130 plus a little cost. Be more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the chief or the city attorney? Vice Mayor?
I just had a question or a minor suggested change by adding health centers to the list of entities that are protected from loud and raucous noise. So we've got like hospitals, church, any school or public building, public park, in any church or hospital. And if we could add health center or in any occupied dwelling that can be heard at a distance of 100 feet or more, I think that might help a little bit as well. And it's noted a couple of times, like 3 or 4 times in the ordinance, where we might just add health centers after hospitals where people go to seek health care.
We can look at that.
Okay.
Mr. Margolis?
Well, I mean, I think looking at that is fine. I think that's a good idea, but the ordinance that's currently before you is really designed for vehicle ingress and egress and not necessarily focused on noise issues. My suggestion is that as we look at noise issues, that should really be part of a more comprehensive noise package. I know the chief has dealt with a lot of unrelated noise problems. For example, bars on the beach. Sometimes we know we get complaints in residential neighborhoods. We know that with Imagine Clearwater opening, we're going to have issues with dealing with the amphitheater, Water's Edge, things like that. So my advice to council is to consider that as part of the comprehensive rewrite for the noise ordinance.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Councilmember Allbritton?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're rewriting the noise ordinance anyway and taking out raucous and putting in actual decibel readings or something. My question is, how did you come up with the 5-foot setback versus 3 foot, something like that? How'd you?
We discussed it amongst staff. We kind of actually started with 3, realized 3 wasn't going to be enough, then kind of looked at 6, and then went and basically settled at 5. We thought 5 was a reasonable amount of distance for the cars to ingress and egress and to allows people's message to be heard. It really balances both.
Okay.
Councilmember Bunker?
As far as wanting to reduce calls to the police department, I have a feeling that many of these protesters will cross that line. So are we going to have to call the police every time and then issue a $130 ticket constantly throughout the day?
Potentially, but the purpose of this ordinance isn't to reduce calls to the police department. It's actually to address a safety concern. So that's the goal, and I suspect we'll still have a presence there. It just gives us a tool to manage and mitigate and allow both sides to exercise their rights.
And I have seen people rushing the cars as they come through, so that is a real concern.
Anything else? I expect to have a full house on Thursday. I want to remind everybody who's here that we are going to keep this civil. Otherwise, I will kick people out of this chamber. There are not going to be able to be signs in here, and frankly, the language, and I don't mean foul language, but the language I've heard from both groups is not helpful. Both sides. I mean, it just doesn't, and I don't think it's changing anyone's mind on either side. So I don't see that it's very positive or impactful. So we'll talk about it further on Thursday, 5.1.
Authorize a purchase order to Municipal Emergency Services for personal protective equipment.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Scott Ellis, Fire Chief, Clearwater Fire Rescue. The item before you is to request approval for the purchase of the personal protective equipment ensemble for our personnel, which includes coats and pants. This request is the amount of $271,060 to Municipal Emergency Service of Pinellas Park for the replacement of the bunker gear as well as for our new hires. Currently, we're replacing about 30 sets this year that have reached the shelf life, guided by an NFPA 1851, which is about 10 years on the bunker gear, and we're hiring approximately 13 due to retirement. The cost per set is $4,928.33, which gives us enough to purchase 55 sets. This dollar figure will be funded the needed funds until July 31st, 2023, which is when the contract expires. Funds are available for this item in the CIP budget 91261, and Pinellas County provides reimbursement of 11.27%, which is a percentage of unincorporated county that we serve. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the chief? Any reason this can't go on consent?
No, okay.
Okay. Consent?
Yes.
6.1. Thanks, chief.
Approve the annexation initial feature land use map designation of residential low and initial zoning atlas designation of low medium density residential for 2635 Woodring Drive.
Thank you. Kyle Brotherton, Planning and Development. So this voluntary annexation request was passed on first reading back in March of 2022 on March 17th, and it involves a 0.201 acre property consisting of one parcel of land. Second reading of this annexation was delayed due to the applicant constructing a single-family dwelling on that property, and since that time, the certificate of occupancy has been issued. And due to the amount of time that has passed since that first reading, new ordinance numbers have been assigned to reflect the current year, and we will be scheduling a third and final reading on March 16th.
Any questions? All right, 7.1.
Approve a purchase order to PowerNet for software and telephony licensing.
Mayor, Councilmember, this is our project for upgrading our telephone system. We've been using the Authorize system for more than 25 years in our facility, and we're moving to a new platform, which will give us a great deal of flexibility and tie into our other systems. It also includes a contract term for a contact center upgrade for our customer service operation, and that will not just be in customer service, it will also be across the other departments in the enterprise that take calls from citizens. It will entail some redoing of numbers, just so everyone is prepared. Originally, when we opened the MSB, we bought a large block of numbers and had a very consistent 562. We've no longer been able to maintain that prefix, so we will be purchasing new numbers. Some will remain the same. Many other numbers will be ported to a new code.
Questions for Mr. Mayor? Consent? Thank you, Dan. 8.1.
Provide direction regarding consolidating the 3 water reclamation facilities.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Brown, Engineering Manager for Public Utilities. Let's see if I got the right Today, I'm going to provide, we're going to provide an update on the Water Reclamation Facilities Master Plan that we're working on, and we're going to request approval from you all to move forward with the recommendation to consolidate the East and Marshall Street Water Reclamation Facilities into our Northeast Water Reclamation Facility. Note, we reduced some slides a little bit, so it may appear slightly different than the one we provided you all in one-on-ones back in December. However, the content and the recommendations remain unchanged.
Can you go to the slideshow so it's the full screen?
Yeah, sure.
There you go.
Thank you.
This is a critical decision point in the project because its subsequent analyses and recommendations are going to depend on which direction we go here today. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ms. Amanda Schwerman, the project manager with our consultant Black & Veatch, and she will deliver the presentation detailing how we arrived at this recommendation.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. The objective of the Water Reclamation Master Plan is to develop a capital improvement project and implementation plan to support the city's 3 water reclamation facilities for the next 30 years. Our approach is designed to be holistic by evaluating what to build and when to build, including population growth and treatment capacity, aging infrastructure and renewal replacement needs, regulatory changes, and operations and maintenance. To build a framework for decision-making, the consulting team in the city collaborated to define the master plan's goals and objectives. These goals are based on the city's overall goals and are in no particular order. They include service reliability and resilience, sustainability, financial responsibility, safety, and quality. Based on the age of the facilities and the upcoming investments required to meet the renewal and replacement needs at the facilities, the team determined it was an opportune time to consider consolidation. One of the first steps of the master plan included determining the most appropriate configuration for the city's facilities, including their service areas. The 6 consolidation scenarios were identified by city staff and analyzed for consideration. Those scenarios include maintaining the existing treatment facilities where they are, consolidating both Marshall Street and East facilities to the Northeast facility, consolidating only Marshall Street to the Northeast facility and maintaining East where it is, consolidating only the East facility to the Northeast facility, maintaining Marshall Street where it is, consolidating both Marshall Street and East to a new facility within the city limits, and then finally consolidating all 3 plants to a new facility within the city limits. A detailed framework for evaluation was created, which included 7 criteria: system reliability and resilience, maintenance reliability and resilience, ease of operations, climate and environmental vulnerability, sustainability, financial responsibility, and public perception. Associated weighting for each criteria were voted on and agreed to with city staff, and the points per category were tallied to identify the top rank configuration. However, before sharing those final scores, there's 2 criteria I'd like to discuss in more detail. The first is climate and environmental vulnerability. The image on the screen illustrates some of the treatment tanks at the East facility, and as you can see, the facility is on the edge of the Tampa Bay. This makes the facility vulnerable to climate change and storm surge. The colored lines indicate the storm surge elevations corresponding to 5 different hurricane categories. If Hurricane Ian, for example, had made landfall in Pinellas County instead of Lee County, it's likely this facility would have been underwater. The Marshall Street facility is a less obvious but very similar vulnerability to storm surge. A Category 4 or 5 hurricane would have submerged this facility as well. The impacts to these 2 facilities being submerged by storm surge include loss of treatment ability, overflowing of raw sewage, equipment damage, and limited access to the site. The Lee County facilities impacted by Hurricane Ian were completely out of service for several weeks and are still at limited capacity even now, nearly 6 months later. Access to beach and water activities would also not be allowed until contamination could be mitigated. The situation at the Northeast facility is completely different, with the facility being completely outside the storm surge area. This facility is the least vulnerable to climate change and coastal hazards. The second criteria I'd like to discuss is financial responsibility. Preliminary costs are prepared for each scenario using a Class 5 standards from the American Association of Cost Engineering. These costs reflect the investment required by the city over the next 30 years, and they include operations and maintenance. These are very similar for each scenario and reflect the largest cost under each scenario as well. Land acquisition, though a parcel was not selected, cost for land acquisition was included for scenario 5 and 6. Capital costs for the water reclamation facilities. These are costs needed to expand the facilities or build new facilities. Capital costs for the collection system. These are costs to build pump stations and pipelines to convey the wastewater to the new facility. And then finally, renewal and replacement costs. These are the costs to maintain the facilities. Similar to cars, each treatment plant gets old, needs maintenance, and eventually needs to be replaced. As shown in the figure, scenario 1, or what we sometimes call the status quo scenario, has the highest renewal and replacement costs. This was one of the drivers that made it feasible to even consider consolidation. Finally, the hardening of the facilities to climate change is included. These are costs to raise seawalls and raise equipment outside of the storm surge. However, these would only really be impactful for lower category storms. These costs were provided to the city's rate consultant to review the impacts for each scenario. Based on the 2022 sufficiency analysis, which recommended an increased rate of 3.5% per year over the next 10 years, the impacts of these investments needed at the facilities range from 1.2% to 2.6% per year. Mirroring the preliminary costs, the scenario with the lowest impact on rates would be scenario 4, and the scenario with the highest impact on rates is scenario 5. So with no further delay, the results of the consolidation scenario are shown on the screen. Scenario 2, which includes decommissioning the East and Marshall Street facilities, transferring the flow to the Northeast facilities, was ranked the highest. While being the second least expensive scenario, this scenario scored the highest in maintenance, reliability, and resilience, ease of operations, climate and environmental vulnerability, and public perception. The Black and Beach team recommends consolidating all the flows to the Northeast Water Reclamation Facility. Even though the evaluation results recommend consolidation, there are several benefits and cautions to be aware of. Starting with the cautions. The design of the consolidated facility and transmission mains will need to account for the potential increase of consequence due to catastrophic failures. We're basically putting all of our eggs in one basket, but the basket can be designed to ensure reliability, redundancy, and reduce the risk of breaking eggs. An increased rate of 1.3% per year will likely be required to implement consolidation and operate the north facility for the next 30 years. Finally, there will be some short-term impacts to roadways as the transmission mains are constructed. However, the routes for the transmission mains can be selected to reduce those impacts to drivers. We believe the benefits outweigh the cautions, with the biggest benefit being a reduced risk of catastrophic failure and contamination due to storm surge. The second biggest benefit is that it lowers the overall cost to the city. It also increases the city's ability to optimize energy consumption and reduce greenhouse gases. And finally, it gives the city an opportunity to coordinate with both the planning and economic development departments to repurpose those city properties for parks, low-income housing, etc. This concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilmember Teixeira.
I know we covered this one-on-ones, but I actually want it on record because I know this is going to be a question specifically about the consequences of having only one plant. I know we discussed some of the safety measures that you've implemented, but I'd like you to on record explain those.
Absolutely. So with the expansion in the Northeast, which would be required to accept all the flows, we would likely recommend a parallel train, which would mean you'd have almost 2 treatment plants on site. So if one went down for whatever reason, you'd have a parallel backup. We can also make sure to include redundancy in transmission mains and pump stations, backup generators, storage tanks, etc. As the design occurred for that, we want to make sure that as much resilience and redundancy that we can build in effectively and efficiently would be included.
And that's all been factored into the estimates?
It has. These are preliminary estimates. I want to point out, the master plan will be concluded in December, and we'll be able to refine all of those recommendations at that point and hopefully tighten up all those cost estimates.
On the evaluation criteria, remind me how these weights were determined. First of all, they're unusual percentages, and I'm frankly a little concerned that financial responsibility is second to the bottom.
Well, we went about this in a couple different ways. The consultant team ranked them ourselves. The utility director ranked his, and then we had all the senior leadership from the utilities rank as well. And we looked at them and kind of averaged those scores. We did run a sensitivity analysis to see if increasing percentages for financial responsibility actually was one of those, and it didn't really move the needle very much. But this came from a collaboration of all of the utility leadership and the consulting team.
What's the time frame for implementation?
As soon as possible due to the risk from storm surge. However, design would have to happen and then construction, so most likely this wouldn't be implemented within the next 5 years. But design could start as soon as the master plan was completed. There's several pieces that have to be designed. That's kind of the timeline.
Are there many cities of our size that consolidate to one?
Actually, the Emerald Coast Utilities Authority, which is in Pensacola, Florida, did this about 10 years ago. They had a facility that was damaged by a hurricane, and it was right on their barrier island. They had FEMA funding, and they were able to move it well inland outside of storm surge and any impacts. There are several other utilities that are actively looking at it, and the state of Florida right now has funding for vulnerable facilities and a new regulation that's coming out to help with identifying the funding on that. So it's being looked at in many places.
So is the reason that the plants were originally put next to the water is we had the ability to dump affluent into the bay?
Yes. Marshall Street is the oldest of the three, and the original facility was no treatment. It was simply gathering all the flow and then dumping it into Stevenson Creek.
Councilmember Allbritton and then the Vice Mayor.
It was eye-opening, the one-on-ones, going through it, and I think most vivid was the graphics that you showed in a Force 5 hurricane would cover those, Marshall Street and Courtney Campbell, the two plants completely. So the other thing that was interesting was that as the mayor was saying, the cost concern, I'm like, well, what's this going to cost us? And you told us at that time that it was actually going to cost less to do this than to fix, to continue on in the way we're doing it. So I think we ought to get on with it, and because what happened south of us, if that hit us, that'd be very scary.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I had a question about the opportunity to change use of city properties. You mentioned parks or low-income housing. Is that possible on those properties, or would it be kind of challenging because there were chemicals and waste and all that?
An environmental study would need to be conducted to look at those things. We know the Marshall Street, for example, there was a coal gas plant there, so some studies would need to be made to confirm that. For the housing, they're still in storm surge areas, so the design of the housing would need to be elevated and those components as well.
And then if, so it's like a 5-year plan before we start to even do construction or transition? But would it reduce the number of jobs in the city? Not that we have people we're worried about, we're so far behind in hiring, but just wanted to ask that question.
No, our evaluation, our analysis is assuming maintaining all the jobs. One, this plant is going to be larger, we'll need more operators, we need more maintenance. So we're assuming that we're going to be maintaining all those jobs.
And then, the higher short-term capital costs. So you have an increase of 1.3% per year. So an increase of what? What are we talking about financially?
So the rate consultant broke that down for me because I had the same question, and she said a 1% increase is about $7 a year. So this would be on top of the 3.5 over the next 10 years, so it would be, 5.2 on average every year.
So 5.2% increase on average every year.
For the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
which is significant. I don't think we have a choice. I mean, I think long-term, it's wise to get those two plants offline. If we get a Category 5 hurricane, I have to say, there's going to be a lot of places we're not going to be processing their sewage anymore for quite a while. But we also have a lot of areas within the city that are high and dry that will continue to need to be serviced, so.
And I will say on that as well, even the status quo scenario, that was a 1.4% increase. So our recommended scenario 2 is a lower increase than doing nothing.
I have one other question too. It's doesn't affect the decision-making, but it's more for clarification. On the evaluation criteria, so you've got climate and environmental vulnerability is just a few percentage points below ease of operations, and you've got under definition complexity of system configuration. Is that like a learning curve, or what is that? I mean, once people know how to operate it, does it really mean like hands-on ease of operations, or yeah, what's the distinction there? I mean,
Well, it's both the facility itself, so having 2 treatment trains, it actually increases the flexibility there, so the ease of operations gets a little bit better, but it's also your whole system, including collection systems, how we're transferring flow around. So it's kind of all of the different pieces in there.
So I'm hearing the direction is to move forward, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
9.1.
Appoint Marquita Humphrey to the Clearwater Housing Authority Board as the Public Housing Recipient Representative with a term to expire March 2nd, 2027. Council members, we have worked with the CHA to identify an individual who qualifies in this position, and she was the only applicant that we were able to receive.
Any questions? Consent?
Yeah.
9.2.
Appoint Robert Kenne to the Municipal Code Enforcement Board to fill an unexpired term through October 31, 2024. Council members, Ms. Bray had to resign due to lack of time commitments. And so we had an application on file, which was Robert Kenne. And although we have posted on social media to seek more applicants, he was the only applicant we had on file.
Questions? Consent?
Yep.
9.3.
Appoint Charlene Harrison as a Creative Pinellas representative to the Public Art and Design Board to fill the remainder of an unexpired term through February 29, 2024. The individual, Danny Olda, who was sitting in that position, is no longer with Creative Pinellas, so Ms. Harrison is the replacement.
Any questions? Consent?
Yep.
9.4.
Appoint an individual to the Community Development Board to fill an unexpired term through February 29, 2024, and an individual with a term to expire March 2nd, 2027. Mr. Flannery has been serving on the board for quite some time. Unfortunately, had to resign. He is traveling, and his travel commitments are a little bit longer than he thought, so he went ahead and resigned. And Mary Law has termed out from the board. So for your consideration, we have Diane Akinelli, Bryn Definius, and Andrew Huff for your consideration. I am expecting another application, but I have not received it yet.
Okay. And was Mr. Hutkin made aware of the fact that these resignations occurred, and did he want to move up from?
I believe so, but I will reconfirm with him.
Okay. I didn't understand Ms. Definis, and she talks about being on the Park and Rec Board. Do we know that she
But she also says she's a planner in her
No,
resume.
I know that, I
Yeah.
just,
In her written summary.
In a
I wish
written
to
summary,
serve on the Parks and Rec Advisory.
I will confirm when she did, because not recently, to the best of my knowledge. Her
Can
name-
we reach out to her and find out?
I've actually reached out to her to resubmit her resume. It seems that she provided a professional biography on the from her website. I guess she does work for McKim & Creed, and so we've asked her to resubmit her her resume.
Okay. Other questions? Why don't we take care of this one on Thursday after we've gotten the information?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So we have one opening on the Community Development Board. I thought we,
We have
Oh,
two.
there's two.
So
Yeah.
we've got one unexpired term, and that's Mr. Flannery. And then the full term.
oh, and an individual.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. 9.5,
Appoint an individual to the library board with a term to expire March 2nd, 2027. Ms. Kelly McLay is available and is interested in being reappointed, and we also had another application on file, Amanda Elon, for your consideration.
questions?
Ms. McLeahy has served pretty admirably for a number of years with only one absence, and she would like to be reappointed, so I think that's generally our,
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it. All right, consent.
Okay.
9.6,
Appoint an individual to the Airpark Advisory Board to fill the remainder of an unexpired term through April 30, 2025. As we all are aware, Mr. Art recently became a city employee and is no longer able to serve on this board, and so we have to fill the vacancy. We have Kevin Boyden, Thomas Crockett, Travis Norton, and Dennis Roper for your consideration.
I think Mr. Roper would be a good choice.
He served twice already.
I liked Mr. Crockett. I think he's a pilot and worked for FAA and familiar with the Clearwater Airpark,
Mr. Roper's a pilot, too.
but he's already served on the board.
And he's had, 6, 7 years off, so.
I think,
We're gonna use the same rationale for Kelly McLean, then I think I'm comfortable with Dennis Roper as coming back to serve an aircraft inspector as well.
I think it's better to give somebody else a different, a turn to serve on the board. It's not a consecutive, it's not just a second term. It's a new voice.
All right, we'll discuss that on Thursday, 10.1.
10.1 is my item, Mayor. In consultation with the clerk, council had directed the revision of the rule relating to reading citizen comments out loud. So this will be a modification to that rule on Thursday, meaning that if council approves this on Thursday, that would mean that comments for this Thursday's meeting will be the final time that the clerk will be reading them out loud into the record.
Okay. Any questions? Vice Mayor?
I did have a question. The phrase "received into the record" means what? Because I just want to understand public access to comments. That's all.
So the comments that are part of the minutes that are received, they're not available until the minutes of the meeting are made available to the public. So they're available in that regard. So once the minutes are drafted, they're attached to them and they're available to the public.
And there's no cutoff. I mean, they can ramble on because,
Yes, in terms of text, there is, I think I have it at 1,200 words. So there is a cutoff. I'm not going to be able to ramble on, but yes, all of whatever they have entered and under their comments would be provided.
okay, great, thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Boyer?
I just have one thing. I did want to mention to the council that Superlative is ready to start engaging the business community. So if council has any ideas or suggestions on who in the business community they should engage, if you could please give me that list and I'll make sure I forward to that. They do expect to start sometime next week.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Anything else, Mr. Margolis?
No, sir.
All right, item 13.1, City Council salaries, Councilmember Teixeira.
So, during the campaign 2022, there was a lot of discussion and conversations about the elections and city council, ranking versus runoffs, the amount that was needed to raise for a campaign. And the discussion was robust, and it poured over into the community as well as a dais. And one of the questions that was raised was, well, who can afford to run in this day and age? And I think the better question is, who can afford to win? Who can afford to forego a livable wage for the minimum of 4 years? And the answer is the very few. Certainly not, let's say, the 45-year-old father of 2 college-bound teens, or the 35-year-old mother with 2 preschoolers, or the 30-year-old college grad with student loans, unless they are independently wealthy. And therefore, I think that this is a very restricting thing that we have, that this representation is not accessible to the vast majority of our citizens. And I think that's sad. So I know that this is, controversial, and I've had many discussions with many people, and it was one of my campaign pledges. And I discussed this with Mr. Margolis to ask for his counsel, and he came up with a statement that I'm going to give him full credit for, because it really resonated with me. And it was the fact that the complexity of this city far exceeds its size. And I truly, truly believe that. Not only as a resident, but as somebody who's been here as a councilwoman for 1 year. Clearwater is unique, and its challenges are unique. And so I just want to go over some of those unique challenges that Clearwater faces. And that is, we are custodians of the top-rated beach, and that is a big responsibility to maintain that. We have diverse residential communities with equally diverse challenges and needs. We have, coming up, 3 CRA districts, a neglected airpark, marinas and harbors that we have to deal with, unusual charter restrictions. We have to build a new city hall, sunshine laws, the downtown blight and the development, at-large elections, which means that we are all responsible for the whole city rather than small districts. And of course, last but not least, a tumultuous relationship with a large stakeholder, which is the Church of Scientology. These are unique to us, and these are challenges which already makes it difficult for someone to want to do this job, someone with talent and passion that need to have to think twice because of these challenges. And that doesn't even come into consideration the general challenges of an elected official. Trying to effectively govern within 20 hours. The negative and destructive nature of social media, the dissemination of false information, abusive communications, the polarizing environment. And so I made this promise, and I realize, and I've been told many times, that this may be political suicide, to actually spearhead this effort. But I'm willing to take that risk if it means that I'm going to leave that door a little bit open wider on my way out. I think that this position should be accessible to the majority of the citizens, and it needs to start off with a livable wage. I know that Tampa just increased their salaries to $70,000, and that's not a city manager council form of government. It's actually strong mayor, and they have districts as well. So again, I know this is risky. I know this is not a popular topic, but I do think that we need to increase accessibility of this position to most of its residents. So I'm thinking a livable wage should be between 60 and 70. I'm willing to hear your response.
Councilmember Allbritton.
Well, this is something that's been talked about for years and years and years. And I think the problem has been that the charter review talks about it, the same thing gets brought up, they bring it to council, and council doesn't adopt it because nobody wants to vote a bigger wage for themselves, although I think what you're saying is, and I would agree with, do it after we leave office, do it on the next cycle. And it does make sense. It's been discussed. I think every charter review, as far back as I can remember, has talked about it. You know, I've seen both sides of it. You know, this is something that you really have to have a love for office, a love for Clearwater to do this job. It's more coming from the heart than anything. There's no financial benefit to it at all. So, but what it does, you got people who look like me here, you know, retired old people. And not that that's a bad thing, but it does leave out a lot of younger people that would do fine in this job, but I couldn't have done it 20, 30 years ago, raising a family, and it's not a part-time job. They say it's a part-time job, but you know, once you get on here with the meetings we have and all the other commitments and the different boards we're on that we represent, it's a full-time job. And the things we go to at night, the things we go to in the morning, ribbon cuttings, all this stuff, it really makes sense to do this. If we really thinking about it, we need to be doing this to include more people that could do this, that are good people, that won't do it until they retire, or, you know, if they're a CEO of a big company and they have people running it, they can do it. And that's what we've had in the past.
And that's it exactly. There's so many people that I encounter every day that are passionate and talented that would love to be in this position, but they're raising a family, and they cannot raise that family and live comfortably, or actually effectively, on $25,000 a year. I mean, we together make, about half of what our city manager and our city attorney makes. And this is not a religious vocation. This is a job that I think should be accessible to many people, to most of these residents. And I mean, I couldn't have done it 7 to 8 years ago, and I probably would have had more energy back then. You know?
Well, it can be done, though. I mean, I'm the only one that has a full-time job up here.
Yes, but would you do it if you didn't have that job?
Well,
Would you be able to sustain it?
I couldn't do it if I didn't have the flexibility where, you know, I control my schedule. And if I didn't have good people back in my office. I mean, for certain people, it would be a bump in what they're making, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, you increase the salaries, and I don't want to be flippant about money, but it's a rounding error in the overall scheme of our budget. But as Councilmember Allbritton has said, this issue comes up every single charter review, every one. And they look at population, and they look at budget, and they look at a bunch of different metrics, and ultimately they come back and say, we're in line with our peers in the area, more or less. I mean, as long as it doesn't take effect, you know, for me, I'm fine voting for it. I don't have a problem with it. I also don't necessarily want, I won't say that.
I know this is tough, and I know I'm going to get a lot of backlash. I already started.
I
already
don't think
have
so.
backlash.
I don't.
Oh, I have. I've already seen it on social media. Politicians only want to line their wallets. What else? We should be taking care of the recycling before asking for a salary. Comments like that. And, you know, I have to just overlook that and just remain true to what I promised and what I think is paramount, and that is that this position should be accessible to more of its residents. And with $25,000 a year, that position is only available to people who are affluent or retired.
Or retired.
Or retired.
Well, it's always been people that are retired, independently wealthy, own their own business, or homemakers. That's who's been up here. Councilmember Punker.
I wish I was independently wealthy. I fit into the retired category, and that was the only way I had the ability to run for office. I'm reluctant to vote myself a raise. It would have to take place after we've left. It isn't much budget-wise, but I don't like the idea of voting to give myself a raise.
Vice Mayor.
Do we know when was the last time city council salaries were increased?
Every year based upon CPI.
But, okay, so we follow the same salary increase structure that the city staff has, right?
No.
We don't?
No, it's Social Security.
Okay,
Whatever Social Security's bump is on an annual basis, that's,
okay. And then,
we've never had an increase since I've been involved that was, an actual voted upon planned increase.
and this would go to the voters, right?
I don't know, how's that work?
No.
It would, okay, two things. Under our city charter, the council by ordinance sets salaries, so it would not go to voters. It is set by ordinance. However, our city charter says that any adjustment in salary could not be effective at the earliest until the commencement of the next term, meaning that even if council decided this week to start that process, it would not go into effect at the earliest until March of 2024. Now, if council was interested in doing it later than that and delaying implementation beyond March of 2024, that's a different conversation to have. But March 2024 will be the earliest it could possibly go into effect based on our current charter.
Well, I agree with your comments about needing to have more diversity on the council, but I think looking at salary alone, I think we need to look at things more comprehensively about whether we have districts or not. So I think there are you talked about the cost of running a campaign, and so I think it's a broader discussion about how best to try to increase diversity here. We had the Kaleidoscope presentation about we lack diversity in leadership, and, that relates to the council for sure. And so I think it's a lot more than just that. And I think a touchier subject is, you mentioned 60 to 70,000 a year, and I would say, do we think that that's a livable wage here in Clearwater a year,
Some people think 25 is. I'm getting resistance for a raise from 25,000. Who can live on 25,000?
Well, and it can't be a single income maybe at 70, right? Even that, to have a life. I know I had 78,000 a year was what I quoted for 120% AMI at the Bluff development set aside. And that's, professionals. And so it's a challenge.
I just think if it's going to happen, it's just going to happen. It should happen now. With, in terms of the risk, political risk, with Mayor Hibbert not wanting to do another term, and Mr. Allbritton ending his second, and me willing to take the risk, I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen now, or else we're just going to keep having this conversation for another 10 years.
I'm fine with increasing it. I think it's mutually exclusive from districts. I don't care to commingle those two issues.
And it's much harder to change that kind of form.
I don't believe in districts, so.
How do you feel about the number? Is it something that
I don't know what it's based upon. I mean, I'd rather have staff actually look at numbers that are justifiable based upon actual cost of living and everything else.
Because I was even thinking for, let's say, I had a conversation about 3 weeks ago with someone that says, well, what about if, I can have another part-time job with this part-time job? And I'm like, I don't know what part-time job you're gonna have that gives you every second Monday off, every first Wednesday off, every third Thursday off, plus the weekends and nights, and every Thursday night off. It's very difficult, like you said, to supplement this income with another job, or, you know what I mean? Because of the flexibility that we need to have this position. So it's another restrictive measure that we have, that, not measure, but something that restricts us from having more people be able to do this, so.
Well, the only other thing that concerns me, though, about raising it is, this is supposed to be, and I know we all understand the time commitment, but if we have people that this is solely what they're doing, I want to make sure they don't cross over into areas administratively that they shouldn't be, because now this is the only thing that they're doing. It is supposed to be, part-time and policy-driven. So I'd ask that, HR come back with some justifiable numbers, and then we can have a further discussion.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. 13.2, Clearwater Historical Society Agreement, Councilmember Allbritton.
Okay, Clearwater Historical Society, the mission is to educate, collect, preserve, exhibit, and promote people, culture, and events in Clearwater. I've been involved with the Historical Society in the past, and I still support it today. We've always had a relationship with the city, but not as strong as some of the other municipalities around us. I'll take Dunedin, for example, that really has a strong partnership with their historical society. I think that, we have something here that is a partnership agreement, and we could, I just wanted to go over it. This is the term of the agreement shall convent, it's actually December 15th, 2022 through December 31st of 2025. And then it can be extended for 3 more years through December 29. The responsibilities of the city is to provide the society with lump sum grant in the following amounts: $20,000 to be invoiced in December of 22, $25,000 to be invoiced January 24, and $30,000 to be invoiced January 25, not to exceed $75,000. And the grant, the funds granted can be used for general operating support of the society. When I was president of the Historic Society, we operated out of the Plum House, which is over on Martin Luther King Jr. And we didn't have a big budget, and we were always constantly fixing the railings that got beat out by the local kids in the neighborhood. But one of the things we did when I was there was we actually got a lease from the Pinellas County School to lease Southward Elementary and make that the actual home for the Historical Society, which they have done. And it's worked out very well. They've done a real nice job of making the old building in the front the actual museum, and they put a lot of money and time into it. Allison Dolan's here. She's the president now, and I just wanted to bring this forward for consideration to everybody. I think that the city really, it's a good thing to support their history. And we need to vote on this on Thursday night, or what is the procedure from here?
We would need to vote on it, unless it's, everybody agrees.
Did everybody get a copy of this?
Yep.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
Well, I
Mr.
think,
Maxwell, you have something to add before?
Just some additional background. So the city council began to support the Historical Society in fiscal year 2017. It was a 3-year, $12,000 a year support grant. That was renewed for fiscal year 19 and extended through fiscal year 22. This is, there's a new agreement, right? That's the one that Councilmember Allbritton has brought forward that increases that amount to $20,000 in this fiscal year. Next fiscal year it would be 25. The third fiscal year it would be 30. There is also an ARPA grant that has been submitted. We have not reviewed that grant yet, but it is in the next couple of weeks. So I just wanted to give you some additional information about that as well.
Go ahead.
so I love the Historical Society and love what they do. We had the Night at the Library Friday that was a phenomenal event and incredibly well attended. So there are just a couple, one of my first questions are, I thought that the Historical Society was going to be applying for some ARPA grants funds, and that's fine. But what I think is most important is for fairness, for good governance and transparency. If we are going to be supporting nonprofits in the community, I think we need to do so like collectively, look at it holistically all at the same time, rather than having this item on the agenda at this meeting, and then as we start to look at the budget later this spring, we may have others that come before us. And so I think in fairness, to have a bigger picture of where and I'm assuming these are from general funds, how we are allocating our general funds needs to be a collective, holistic, annual practice of good governance related to the budget at one meeting, so that things don't just kind of slide in here and there, and that we don't have a good understanding of how much is going out and where. Okay.
Just one more thing to add. We do, in this fiscal year's budget, there's a $12,000 amount. So we carried over the $12,000 total that was for last year. That was paid out to the Historical Society, but we kept that in the budget this year. So there is a line this year in the council budget for $12,000. We do not have one for the full 20 that's been requested in here.
Okay. And then, is the Historical Society getting funding from the county as well? Where there are multiple funding sources? And, I think to look at these organizations that will be coming before us for funding, it'd be good to have an understanding of where their funding sources are. I think a financial accounting is good. Part of this draft resolution was will provide a financial and activity report to the council city annually. And I'm sure Allison is not getting rich on a salary with the Historical Society, but no salary, okay. So those kinds of things need to be looked at when we allocate funding, for these different organizations.
I think there's a special situation here, from my understanding. This was being talked about for quite a while, and it was actually agreed upon, but because of the staff changes, it fell through the cracks. So I perceive this as honoring what was already agreed to, but because of the staff changes, it fell through the cracks. That's how I see it.
Agreed to by whom and when?
I don't know the dates, but I know there was a conversation between Ms. Allison and Ms. Hubbard, was that? Yes. And we can verify that if you want.
Ms. Blair.
Excuse me, so yes, we do know that as a result of there being staff changes, that some of these things fell through the cracks. This is one of those. Mr. Hubbard does not have the authority to enter into an agreement, though, so, I think what the agreement was that it would be brought forward, not that he committed the city to the contract at all. But there absolutely were conversations, and this was supposed to come forward, and it did not as a result.
Well, what do we think about having it come forward with all the other requests at the same time? I mean, what's the rush or, some exception that's made for this at this time, rather than looking at all of them holistically at a fair evaluation?
What other requests do we have right now?
Well, I know that we've had a lot of nonprofit funding last year, and, we had in early fall a list of nonprofit organizations that got funding last minute, and I thought that we were going to have a much more robust discussion this budget cycle about how much general funds get distributed to nonprofits in our community.
Councilmember Allbritton.
What I would say to that is, I don't really think of the Historical Society on even par with a nonprofit. I've always been very surprised that the city didn't have more of an active role in supporting our history. This is our history of the city. And if the city doesn't really care about that, we're not going to have a history. We have a group of people that I work with for years that tried to build this up and keep that history so we can show our kids and our grandkids about Clearwater. And I know that I've always kind of been a little disappointed in Clearwater hadn't taken a more active role in that, because some of the other municipalities around, it was very important to them, and I didn't feel that Clearwater really cared. This is not a big, to me, a big commitment. This is just something that I think Clearwater needs to keep track of their history. It's very important. So I don't put it on par with all the other nonprofits. I think this is a very special nonprofit that I think the city has a commitment to honor.
I would agree with that, and I would anticipate I would vote for allocation of funding for the Historical Society. I just think it needs to be done in a transparent, equal footing way with others. Granted, we can move them up, and I think they do play a special role, but I think as far as being transparent and fair, doing it all at one time is the best way for governance.
I agree with Councilman Allbritton. I don't think of this as a nonprofit or a charity. I think this is part of our city's fabric. And when I go there and I look at, the pioneering women or Coast Guard or military exhibits, I find that inspirational, and I think it's part of our identity. And as a city, we need to support our history because it's part of our identity and our pride. So I think this is pretty transparent. If anybody can look at the agreement, this is a discussion that this entity has been having for over a year and a half. So the due process has occurred. So I feel very comfortable with honoring this agreement.
So I'm going to defer to the attorney, but based on council rules, the appropriate action would be to direct staff to place it on the next agenda. The agenda as written just says Clearwater Historical Society Agreement. There was really nothing there explaining to the public or to council exactly what the ask is. So I think that would be the most appropriate. In that way, staff can ensure that any of the budget information is included with the next agenda for the next council meeting.
So we can defer that to the 16th, March 16th meeting.
If there's consensus of council.
So this is not considered enough information on the attachment? I'm just asking.
I'm actually okay with council potentially voting on this on Thursday, but just a couple things to point out that are relatively minor in nature. Number one is, from a budget perspective, it will have to be identified what the funding source is for this. Right. And then number two, because Mr. Hubbard had worked on this agreement, because it is just a draft, my understanding from my attorneys, is that there is an updated draft of this agreement, and we would want to present that updated draft prior to Thursday. So from a procedural standpoint, I would be okay with the fact that this has been discussed at a work session. I do agree with Councilmember Teixeira that there is enough information there to apprise the public as to what the item is. Now, as to the Vice Mayor's point about whether council actually wants to treat the Historical Society differently than we treat other nonprofits, that's a decision for council. So if council would like to have a vote on this on Thursday, I would do two things. Number one, to work with finance to make sure we have the appropriate budget code for it. And number two, to work with my lawyers to make sure we have the most recent draft of the agreement, because I believe, as I said, this draft is a little bit out of date.
Vice Mayor.
So I continue to struggle with the idea that we have discussion items that are listed on our agenda for discussion, and then we vote on them, and it's financially, it's a financial commitment that we vote on Thursday. I don't think that's fair to our voters to have something on an agenda that's just listed as discussion, and then for a work session on a Monday, and then, whenever our council agenda item is published for Thursday night, who knows when, then they have, a flag or information that, wow, they're going to be voting on a financial allocation. And I don't think that's fair to voters, to give them a heads up about where's the money going and for what reason until the last minute. Procedurally, that just doesn't seem right. If the proposal is to allocate some money, I think it should be indicated on a work session agenda item and not on a discussion.
But isn't the attachment very clear that, if you read I just think it's pretty clear that they're asking for money. It's all written there. That's the attachment. You're saying you want more time for this, for the public to read it? What exactly are you asking for?
I think it's just more transparent to the public that, wow, this is a budgetary item that there's a potential to allocate funds and vote on a Thursday, rather than just a collective philosophical discussion about direction or new ideas or updates or things like that. To me, a discussion heading is more discussion, not voting.
Careful what you ask for.
Well, we had an item.
Share with me, like, for example,
Just remember that for, future reference if we have a discussion item. Go ahead, Councilmember Allbritton.
Well, we were discussing appointing the interim city manager to manager, and we will be voting on that Thursday night.
Well, what we'll be voting on is whether to do a national search or not. Now, if we appointed Ms. Poyer as the permanent city manager, that would not necessitate a national search, obviously. But the agenda item is whether or not to hire, the company to do the search. I'm fine with putting it on the 16th. It's not going to be a huge issue to have it as an actual agenda item on the 16th, so that'll make everybody happy. It's only 2 weeks. We'll have it on the work session on the 13th, and then we can discuss it. We'll have the updated agreement. It'll give us time to talk to folks at the Historical Society, and it certainly will be enough notice for any citizens that are either in support or opposed. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Margolis? I already asked you that.
You did, but I just want to elaborate a little bit. I really do want to distinguish this situation from one in which, meaning with the Historical Society, from one in which an item is very oblique on the agenda and does not provide a lot of insight to the public as to what the council is considering. I just want to be clear that in this particular context, I think that the title of the item makes it clear that there's a discussion about an agreement, and the specific terms of the agreement are attached to that item. And it's not a lengthy agreement or a complex agreement either. So under the very specific facts here, I do believe that if council wanted to go forward with it on Thursday, that would be okay. However, I do agree with the Vice Mayor that there are times when I am concerned about the obliqueness of certain items. This was particularly a feature under our prior city manager, where we had items that would come forward as city manager reports, and yet they are items that were phrased in a vague manner or were not very transparent as to what the council was actually going to be discussing, or even in some cases being asked what to do. But I just want to say that I'm okay with this item, but I understand the Vice Mayor's point that depending on how these items are phrased, there can be, I think, a very serious concern about public transparency. It's just that for this particular one, I think that we're okay. So I just wanted to make my views known on that.
Okay. Any future items? Vice Mayor.
I'd like to give an update on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Policy Board meeting that I went to last Friday. And also, I'd like to have a discussion on Drew Street information. So apparently there's a call for letters from Brian Schroyer by March 2nd of this year. And so I think we need to have a discussion about that and what's going on with Drew Street. FDOT.
Okay. Other items? I've got a question for you, Councilmember Allbritton. I don't understand why PSTA decided to make the Sunrunner free for another 6 months. I disagree with the decision. That means the rest of the system is subsidizing that route. And all I've ever heard from PSTA is that they need more money. And yet now they're making routes free. And they aren't free. There's drivers, there's vehicles, there's fuel. I just don't get it.
Well, I would defer you to if you have a chance, look at the meeting. We had a lively discussion on that. There were two sides to it, and a lot had to do with the data collection. They thought it was valuable. It was brought up that perhaps we not do it 6 months. We do it, not till December, but do it at a 90-day thing. They thought that with the new input of the touchless pay and some other reasons, that kind of prevailed.
How are you getting good data, though, when you're giving something away?
Because we're paying a company to put people on the buses to collect data that can be useful later on who's riding, where they're going, and a lot about the routes. I had a concern on that because I go, if you give somebody a card, they're not going to fill it out. They go, no, there's going to be somebody on the bus taking these with an iPad, and putting them down. So I guess it's very important to have data in a public transit situation where you can say we have X amount of riders. And it gives us more time. I think the general consensus was it gives us more time to really see who's riding it through the season. And if it's more seasonal with tourists or people coming from downtown to the beach, if they're businesses and how the businesses are responding to it. We had a pretty lively debate on it.
Okay. There are two things I'd like to have on the agenda in the future. First of all, and Ms. Call, I haven't told you about this. This is no reflection on you. I would like to have agendas published on Monday.
Yeah.
And this might take 4 or 5 months for us to get the system in place to do this, but I think they ought to be published a week prior to the work session. First of all, I want more flexibility to finish my agenda, and I think it gives citizens more time, and I know, that staff has deadlines, and sometimes they don't make them, and we move everything around, but I've kind of had it. So that's something I don't know if we need to discuss, and I don't know how long it will take to implement. but I want us to move towards that.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Is everyone comfortable with that?
It would be nice to have it, the Friday before, so we could have 2 weekends, but certainly a Monday would be great, and, yeah, like Monday by noon, I don't know, something. It's just, the prior meeting, there were like almost 300 pages of attached documents that came out on a Thursday, I think, and it's just not, it's
too much.
It's too much.
Yep.
And we need to do a good job.
It also does not give me any opportunity to consult the staff.
Absolutely.
Enough time
Yep.
to have good conversations with staff regarding the agenda items.
Mayor and council, I can implement a change so that it is published the Monday prior, but I will not be able to implement it until after April 4th. So as we speak right now, today, I'm already working, deadline's already starting for the April, I'm advertising for April meetings, so if I can ask for that, I would.
No, that's fine. I don't have a problem with you taking the time necessary, and I
It
know
will be a
there's
change for staff.
workflow and everything else, so I understand that this could take 3-4 months to do, but we need to start moving towards it.
I've thought of some, I spoke with Jennifer Friday, and so
Okay.
I have a plan. It's going to be different for staff, but I can make it done.
Thank you.
Change is inevitable, and they'll work it out. The other is I've been approached about a resolution on anti-Semitism, and I'd like to have that shared with all of you through Mr. Margolis. It's something I'd like to put on the agenda in the future so that we might be able to pass that. That's all I've got. Anything else? Can't wait to see you all Thursday. It's going to be just marvelous. All right, we're adjourned.